welcome to the Total Soccer Show. I am Taylor Rockwell, and with me I've got a man from the country of champions. It's Daryl Grove.
Hello, under-20 champions.
There it is. Yes, so, Daryl Grove, I haven't spoken to you since England won the U20 World Cup final, beating Venezuela 1-0. I'm curious how it feels to have finally won the World Cup again.
Weird, right?
Yeah.
Weird, especially because I had to be explaining to some of the English people around me exactly what it was that just happened and what we just won, because nobody knew it was happening. So it was on Eurosport, because obviously I'm still in Spain. But in England, apparently, the BBC put in like a last-minute bid to screen it. They were just like, "Oh, people should watch this. We should buy this real fast." And they bought the U20 World Cup final so that people could watch it.
And was it mostly English people that you were explaining the result to?
Yes. I mean, there's a lot of the English people in my hotel, and I guess anyone who's not English would have zero interest in watching it. And there were no Venezuelan U20 fans there either. Yeah,
I had a feeling. But so was the result of the England fans sort of like the traditional English stiff upper lip of like, all right then, well done?
No, actually, a lot of people asked, well, how come none of these guys can get a game in the Premier League?
And your response to that was money?
It was, well, Lewis Cook does.
There you go.
And Josh Onoma should.
Yeah. Well, that is not why we've...
Dom Sankey just joined Liverpool, right?
Yes, I believe so.
People that as well. But yeah, I guess you want to talk about what happened at the Azteca.
I do, yes. So let's talk about the USA's 1-1 draw with Mexico in World Cup qualifying. To do that, we've called you up once again. I believe you are still on a beach in Spain. So we might get a little bit of wind, might get some waves crashing, maybe a fake seagull in the background. Who knows? But let's start.
The waves will crash harder than Michael Bradley running through a midfield.
More on that in just a moment, because first we got to get to the lineups, because we thought maybe it would be kind of what we saw against Trinidad. Maybe there'd be a couple changes here and there, but overall we thought it'd be roughly similar, and we were wrong, because I got, I think, a tweet like 12 hours ago in the middle of the day that was like, Arena just said that there might be 7 changes. And I thought that can't be true. That's got to be head games. And yet, then when we started, new formation, lots of new faces.
Well, he did it right. He did hint at this when he first announced the big roster, right?
Yep.
Wasn't the original roster like 27 or 29 men? Like 27, I think, way more than the 23 you need. And he did say there'll be a lot of changes between games. And I don't think anyone really, including us, didn't really pay enough attention to what he was saying, because in hindsight, this was the plan all along, right? And the brief back three towards the end against Venezuela, with like Tim Ream was in that was definitely like, let's give this a little run out. Yeah. And he was definitely planning this all along.
He was.
What was your take when you actually saw the 11 names that were selected?
Well, see, I think I didn't see it till late. I was coming back from yet another family function. We had a lot of family parties this weekend. So I saw Matt Doyle's reaction to the lineup first, and that made it more sense to me. If I had just seen the lineup, I would have been like, wait, how many center backs are we playing? And like maybe there's going to be one in midfield. Yeah. But his point was it's essentially a 5-4-1. And that made a lot more sense to me. That you've got everybody dropping in. Christian Pulisic maybe a little bit freer. And then like 3-4-2-1 attacking. That made a lot of sense. And then I saw the reaction to that seemed to have been like, oh, well, we're just giving up. Like, we're just trying something experimental. We're putting in new faces. Like, he's clearly trying to take the pressure off and not caring. And I saw it much more as, like, no, we are going ultra defensive. We are going in there to get a result. Not necessarily a win, but certainly a point.
Yeah, not just like, what's the phrase? Like, clear eyes, full hearts, can't lose, kind of just do it with your heart kind of thing. It was more like, here's the plan. This is what we're going to do. And I really enjoyed seeing that there was a plan. In fact, so you mentioned the Matt Doyle tweet, right? And he said essentially we're Costa Rica. That kind of it clicked in my head. And then I saw a Shin Guardian tweet, Matt Tomaszewicz, and he said, think of it this way: you've got 2 great passers in midfield, Bradley and Acosta, and you've given them targets to aim at, fast targets in Bobby Wood down the middle, Areola and Yedlin on the right, and then DaMarcus and Christian Pulisic down the left. So you've got like good passes in midfield, fast runners ahead of them, just to hit targets over the top. And that's pretty much was the plan, right? On the counter was to get the ball over the top for those guys to chase down. So I love it not only when a plan comes together, I love it when a plan happens in a US men's national team jersey.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you there, and I also love it when a plan comes together based on like prior work, because this was clearly something that had been practiced a lot, that everybody seemed to know their role, to the extent that I assumed that maybe Bruce Arena had always thought, we'll give Villafaña a rest for the Mexico game, we'll put Beasley in, and he'll be more used to playing as a wingback. In reality, I didn't realize until like halfway through the game that Villafaña was hurt, not even on the bench. So that's why. So I think he probably would have started in this game, but for the injury, so he's out, and in comes DaMarcus Beasley, who I think did an admirable job given his advanced age and the fact that he has now played every single position on the field save goalkeeper.
Yeah, I mean, some people might point at him for the goal, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a little while. But yeah, I think he had a really solid game at left back and was up against a really stern test. And same as Yedlin, sort of really held his position well, got forward occasionally. Yeah, I think it was an excellent performance.
Yedlin was the one for me. I mean, he was not my man of the match. We can talk about that later as well. We're hyping lots of things. But I, once again, am so impressed by how much better he looks than he did last time we saw him in a U.S. jersey. He's able to handle, obviously still has the pace to handle the battles that he was in with Lozano. Struggled at times, got the yellow card, I think unfairly, but whatever. And then didn't do anything dumb, because I thought, oh no, that seems like it's going to be another card. They're going to isolate him, they're going to go at him, they're going to try to get him to do something dumb. He held his own. He had a great second half. I thought DeAndre Yedlin was excellent in this game.
And also, so the last game we were praising sort of the Yedlin-Nagbe partnership, where they formed that sort of defensive shield when they needed to.
Yep.
This game on that right-hand side, it was Yedlin-Areola, then it was Yedlin-Nagbe, and then towards the end it was Yedlin-Zusi. So the constant in all those is Yedlin.
Yeah, and I think he deserves praise. I think Michael Bradley and Kellen Acosta deserve praise. For Bradley, obviously, for obvious reasons. But just, I thought their partnership was really good. I thought that they locked it down in the middle. And I really did think that, yes, Mexico had a few chances that made us all nervous, and maybe would have had some more if it weren't for Jeff Cameron, who is my man of the match. But I think, I think really, when you look at how strong this Mexican team has been in qualifying, how strong they are in terms of their roster depth, I think that this was about as good of a game as you're going to get against Mexico. And I know that's going to upset some people because it's still a 1-1 draw. And yes, they hit the post on on that lovely Hector Herrera free kick. Not Miguel Herrera, Hector Herrera. But still, I just thought when you've got teams having to kind of take shots from distance, not really able to combine through the middle, that even when they do play the ball in, it tends to be like a yard too high or a yard too long. It seemed to me like Mexico had a really difficult time figuring out this U.S. team, which again speaks to, I think they really thought it was going to be a 4-2-3-1.
So do you have any qualms about going 5-4-1 and really sitting back a lot and just hoping for, or using, I don't want to say hoping, I want to say using pace on the counter, but obviously very, very defensive. Like we feel slightly, I remember feeling slightly, not miffed, but, oh, here we go. When you see Honduras come out in a 5-4-1, you sort of think, oh, no, they're just putting everybody behind the ball. So it's kind of interesting for our team to be that team for a change. So to me, it was like an interesting experience to sort of go through the emotions of seeing that happen. So, I don't know, what's the reaction from fans like, and what's the reaction from you like, seeing the US go ultra defensive? I mean, it really was, right? 5-4-1 is pretty much as defensive as you can get.
I think with the way the game ended with that goal and the off-the-post shot from Michael Bradley in the second half, I think people will be more optimistic than they usually might be after a 1-1 draw. I think initially there was a lot of pessimism both about the changes that were made, the formation itself, and there was a lot of like, all right, so we're just not going to do anything for 90 minutes. I would argue that, and I was genuinely excited for this lineup, and I thought maybe there was a chance that this would get the U.S. a positive result because it was just so different than what we expected. But as you said earlier, and I think you hit the nail on the head, you kind of keep a lot of your key pieces out there. You keep Christian Pulisic, and you kind of give him a more free attacking role than he had in the last game. You have Bobby Wood in there now, who's a little bit faster, a little bit more technical than Josie Altidore, though you wouldn't know it tonight. I think Paul Areola has been tearing it up in Liga MX. So I think you can see why those players get in there. And so you still have those skillful players who can do something in 1v4 situations and still make something happen. But then you're still sitting back. So I think this was an example of the U.S. being defensive, but also keeping their strengths out there. I thought it was a really interesting, almost hybrid approach, and it made me happy. I think it was the pragmatic, practical approach, and that's what we expect from Bruce Arena.
I think the ends justify the means, right?
Yeah.
So if we'd gone 5-4-1 and really sat back and none of the counter-attacks had come off and the US had lost 2-0, then I think we'd all be complaining that we went there and didn't really try to do anything. But I think the Bruce Arena sort of played it so perfectly that the ends justify the means and everybody's happy with a 1-1. It really feels like a victory, right? To go to the Azteca, defend like that, have a great goal from your captain, and come away with a point.
And I want to say again, and like people are welcome to disagree. I'm sure many will, but I also don't think that it was that sort of like holding on for the 1-1 draw. Like, yes, at the end Mexico were attacking. Yes, they had the corner that they took backwards for some reason, and thus the final whistle went. That was a little odd to me, but it didn't feel like this sort of last ditch, everyone like sacrificing their bodies and everybody going in and everybody just hoping and scrambling and holding on. It did still feel more organized. That said, I know that it probably could have been 4-1 Mexico if Jeff Cameron weren't playing. So I know that, like, I'm not trying to say that like the U.S. outplayed Mexico by any stretch of the imagination, but I will say that it was a more comprehensive performance that I think the lineup and formation would have suggested at the beginning.
Can I say one more thing then before we get into the specifics of the game?
You may.
I would say, weirdly, even though it's a 5-4-1 formation, right, which is defensive, I think it's actually very brave and ballsy of Bruce Arena to drop the big names, right, like Clint Dempsey, Josie Altidore, Fabian Johnson, to not start with those guys.
John Brooks,
Howard. Did you hear the reasoning for why Tim Howard wasn't selected?
No.
So I think Stu Holden mentioned it in the broadcast. The reason that Bruce Arena wanted to start Brad Guzan is that he thought the US would be taking a lot of goal kicks because of the way they were playing.
Oh, wow.
And therefore, he wasn't sure if Tim Howard was up to like the continual goal kicks. So Brad Guzan gets the nod instead. Basically, his adductors are stronger.
I mean, again, that's practicality right there. Like you're kind of recognizing
that's this game, right?
Yeah, and if anything, that's sort of like what we love in a manager, or at least I love in a manager. I'll let you decide what you love and you don't love, as much as I would like to be able to control that. I think it's impressive for a manager to have the wherewithal to know that, to just say, we're going to take a bunch of goal kicks. I'm worried about him being able to take those goal kicks, so I will make this change. That's really difficult to make, because even just managing like our amateur team, it's really tough to be like, this guy is maybe better skill-wise, but this guy's fitter and ready to go. So we're going to like we struggle to make that change. That is nothing compared to swapping out your goalkeepers in World Cup qualifying away to Mexico. Like, that speaks to how confident Arena is in his decision making, and maybe how confident he is that there's no other option if everything goes terribly for him.
And then also, I guess, just fitness came into it as well. Not so much fitness as tiredness, I guess, because there's no way you would drop Darlington Nagbe from the starting 11 on form, right? After the game he had against Trinidad and Tobago. I think he was both of our man of the match, right? Sort of after Pulisic, I guess. So just the idea of sort of not starting him seems totally counterintuitive, and yet makes perfect sense when you see how this game unfolded. Yes.
So to the game itself, I have to say, I don't like you, Daryl Grove. Or at least I didn't like you briefly.
What did I do?
Because I was watching, I had paused it for a second, so I was about 1.5 to 2 minutes behind, and your text came through, and you wrote ARG. Now, you wrote a long ARG. It was more like ARG, but it was still ARG, and that is
it had a random J at the end as well, which I think was a typo.
Either way, ARG is still a negative. So when you wrote that, I read that as like arg, like frustration, like, oh no, Mexico are about to score. So then I was like, what? I'm behind you. Oh no. And then your response was, you'll know it when you see it. And I think as I read that, I looked up at the screen to see Michael Bradley chip Memo Ochoa from about 45 yards out. And it was spectacular. And I loved it.
It was spectacular. Yeah, I loved it too.
What was
should we do some analysis of it? Or do you want to do some emotions first?
No. We should do some analysis.
Okay. First of all, I think one of the things that we kind of learned from the Trinidad game was don't have Michael Bradley sitting too deep and having things come at him. Have Michael Bradley getting up there, getting involved, putting some pressure on people, and then he can really do some damage and kickstart some attacks, right? The first goal against Trinidad starts with Michael Bradley. I know there's some other stuff in between, but it really starts with Michael Bradley pressing and winning the ball back in midfield. This goal again starts with him stepping, but instead he finishes it himself.
And I want to add to that, it's not just Bradley stepping, and this was the key part of the goal, I think. I mean, obviously, taking nothing away from the chip, but a key factor in this goal is that when the U.S. are in that back three, a lot of times what you can want to do is have your center backs just sit and wait for somebody to come. And the U.S. did a really good job of sending the free man forward to disrupt in midfield. And in this situation, it's Jeff Cameron who's up there as well, putting pressure.
Yep.
And that is what forces that turnover. So it's that aggressive step from the U.S. defense, and Jeff Cameron in particular, that leads to that miss-pass, miss-touch, and then Bradley's on it. Bradley makes that interception, makes another smart touch, and then it's recognizes the situation and hits an inch-perfect chip into the back of the net.
Did you spot who Cameron was stepping to?
No.
It was Javier Hernandez. It
that
was
makes
Chicharito,
sense. Yeah.
who was, I think, coming deep, looking for the ball and thinking that the centre-backs wouldn't go with him.
Yep.
And he'd found a little gap in between Bradley and Acosta. Jeff Cameron sees this and comes charging up to get him.
Yep.
And he gets kind of, I'm not exactly sure if it was a nudge or a tackle or whatever, but he at least gets a body or a foot onto Chicharito.
Yeah.
And Michael Bradley is then the first to, I think he's like the first to react, right? Because he's able to get past Hector Herrera by just taking a really quick touch, like being first to the ball and taking a touch around him before Herrera's even sort of noticed what was happening. So it's all about sort of the speed of thought and reaction from Cameron and from Bradley.
Yep. And it's kind of a bummer, I think, because I do think you're still going to get the people who say, well, see, if you put Bradley in an attacking position, then he can still be good. And it's sort of like, no, he does what he needs to do. And I think he did a really good job of like running that midfield, keeping things organized, and then taking his chances when they came, be it that little chip or, as I mentioned earlier, that half volley that goes off the post. And I really thought was going to send it to 2-1 for a moment there. But yeah, I mean, and then to go to that chip, though, for a second, I mean, that is like technically brilliant. Like we were watching with our buddy Scott, his wife Stephanie, and Stephanie was saying, like, I just love how he like makes it look like he had no effort behind that ball, and yet it still went really, really far. And I was like, yep, that is what it takes to be that good at that level, and that's exactly what he did.
So yeah, did you get a good look at it? I thought maybe like there wasn't a lot of follow through on it, which is obviously how you chip a ball, but it just kind of looked form wise, it looked kind of perfect.
Yep. I mean, yeah, it was. I mean, he hit it exactly how you want, and then, he kind of, like, halted that follow-through, so it sends the ball, it puts that, like, kind of weird spin on the ball. That is always going to be a problem. But I think it's just that really good, the really good awareness, though, just to pick his head up, like, really, because he doesn't even, like, pick his head up and then put it back down and take another touch. It's as he's charging onto the ball, I think he notices Ochoa's off his line, and when he puts his head down, he doesn't pick it back up. He puts that ball in the net. So, I mean, I think it was just... Go ahead.
I think normally when you see this stuff, you sort of see the player look and see the keeper off his line, and you almost see that light bulb go off over his head, or a chip, like a Dorito chip, go off over his head.
Yep.
And then he sort of looks up and does it. And I'm thinking of like maybe chips that are from farther out, like the famous '96-ish David Beckham one against Wimbledon. Like he really sees the keeper off his line, looks down, looks at the ball, checks all the angles, and then fires it.
Yeah.
The thing that's so impressive to me about Bradley is that it's a surprise even to you as a viewer, right? Because he gives no indication that that's what he's doing. You think he's just going to carry the ball forward, and then suddenly it's already left his foot and it's going over Ochoa's head. So there's definitely like an element of surprise to it.
And again, this is why I don't like you, because I still saw that go in, and then I saw ARG, and I thought, like, what? Did they call it back for offside? Did they call it back for a foul? What? Why doesn't this goal count? Like, it took me a while to be like, okay, this is real. This happened. This was the thing. So that happened.
It was just a scream of celebration. Did you not see Fiore at halftime?
Yeah, he was pretty happy. He was about 2 seconds behind, unfortunately, for his goal call. But yeah, it was good. So USA go up 1-0, and then, unfortunately, it's 1-1. At least, unfortunately, if you're a U.S. men's national team fan. And there, I think, is a decent amount to talk about with this goal. So where do you want to start?
I mean, why couldn't Carlos Vela have just stayed away forever? I mean, extend that sabbatical. As long as you want, Carlos.
I mean, I think that would have been the nice thing to do, but he did not. I think also Chicharito staying away might have helped a little bit, and maybe Ochoa not having as good of delivery, and I think maybe Bobby Wood not whiffing horrifically. And that is, I think, where I want to start with it, because that was pretty rough.
Oh, so I didn't see Bobby Wood whiff. I saw him strike it, but it was a block from a centre-back.
Oh, no, he straight whiffs it.
No, are you sure?
Yes.
I'm pretty sure a centre-back gets a foot on it as Wood connects with it.
I am very confident. We can agree to disagree, but I am very confident that he straight whiffs that ball because he sets it up perfectly. It's off the Tim Ream header back in, and he sets it up perfectly and just goes to get the hips around it and misses. That's what I saw. Now maybe the Mexico player gets a touch to it. Maybe he does make contact, but from my angle, what I have written in my notes is would whiff in all caps because I remember that alone as being really embarrassing because I thought, oh, surely he's going to finish there. Then Ochoa collects the ball, and then it's off to the races.
All right. Well, this is the quick take, hot take, right?
Yep.
So maybe when you do the full review, I think you said possibly with Matt Doyle of MLSsoccer.com tomorrow. Maybe he'll have the full story.
All right. Well, yeah, or I'll just watch the whole bunch.
I'll accept your apology in any media.
All right. Well, I hope you're right because in my mind, a whiff from inside the 6-yard box is not particularly forgivable if you're a forward. So if it was that he did actually make contact and it was blocked, that's much better. But I would say if it was blocked, that usually means it goes back out into play and spills out, and that it delicately rolled into the hands of an onrushing Memo Ochoa, again, points to maybe he didn't make quite the contact that he would have liked. But either way...
Okay. Let's not go over this over and over again. But I would say maybe the bigger problem there was the plan to have the centre-backs in the opposition box for all the corner kicks.
Yep.
Because it's what Gonzalez and Ream both get headed on that. Mm-hmm. Jeff Cameron is also in the box. And so this is the immediate thing that struck me. The first time the US had a corner kick, all 3 centre-backs went up, right? All the big guys. Because we had a lot of corner kicks early on because we'd had so many breakaways that had resulted in corners. And then we'd sent back, I think Bradley and Acosta went back to cover the space left by the centre-backs, right? And first time I saw it, I thought, oh, that's pretty clever, I guess, as long as we don't get caught out with no centre-backs.
Yep.
But then we got caught out with no centre-backs. Yeah. If you watch that goal, as Vela's approaching, like after Chicharito plays the ball to Vela, our back 3, our own like 3 defenders are, from left to right, DaMarcus Beasley, Michael Bradley, DeAndre Yedlin.
Not great.
Cameron and Gonzalez and Ream are all still coming back. So we were caught out with no centre-backs.
And here's what I want to say to that. I think you're absolutely right that was not great. And I think another person who noticed that as being a potential problem for the U.S., strength for Mexico, was Juan Carlos Osorio. And I think that's why you saw Ochoa, as soon as he gets that ball, he's looking to distribute. Because I'm guessing they realize that if it is the U.S. team that they expected, they being Mexico expected coming to the Azteca, it was going to be a defensive team that are probably going to try to put numbers in the box on set pieces, snatch that goal, and then sit back again. And so I think if you think that's going to be their plan, then the obvious read is, but that means their one time that they're sending everybody forward and desperately trying to score is therefore a really, really good opportunity for a counterattack because they've got everybody up, so get that ball forward as quickly as you can. I think that's why Ochoa just bullets that ball to the feet of Javier Hernandez.
And I wonder if Arena could do this again, if he might say, you know what, maybe like we've got this like almost like perfectly set up defensive plan.
Yeah.
There's this one little gap in the armour that we're going to give because we want to go forward for corners. Mm-hmm. Maybe we don't do that. I wonder if he would make that decision instead.
I see, and this is where I do have faith in Arena to continue to like work with the players to get different systems in place because I am of the mind that maybe it's like this is something they worked on all week as like we're definitely sending these guys forward. We're going to do it every single time, not expecting to be ahead inside of 6 minutes. And so maybe the next time it happens, they're capable of being like, okay, we're ahead, everybody stay, and like switching it up. But if it's something that you've worked on all week, I imagine it's a little bit difficult in the moment to be like, never mind, change it up really quickly. We're not doing that anymore. Yeah. But I do have faith in him to kind of figure that out by the next game.
Yeah, so you're saying there should be like a plan A corner kick, is like when it's 0-0 or we're losing 1-0, but then a plan B corner kick when we're ahead is when we don't need to take any risks.
Yeah, I mean, and I would say like the key exhibit of that, and I know people made fun of me last time, wondering how much of the show was going to be Man United references. Well, here's one for you. Remember the Europa League final when they're up 1-0? They put 3 people in the box, 4 people in the box for their corners, because it is that sort of like we do not need to commit numbers forward. We're happy to sit back, and if something happens, it does, and if it doesn't, then that's fine too.
Okay, so what else happened on this goal? For example, how much are we blaming DaMarcus Beasley for not getting a full tackle in on Carlos Vela?
Honestly,
he sort of shuffles him inside, right?
Honestly, I blamed him a lot, and then I crossed it out because Stu Holden said Stu Holden wisdom. And I think he had a really good point, which is that DaMarcus Beasley does a really good job for what you mentioned, that it's the U.S. in transition. They've got their 3 center backs forward. he does a really good job to kind of slow things up. And then I think Stu Holden is right that he lets Vela come back inside with the expectation that there will be center backs there or defensive midfielders there to step and win that ball. But because the defensive midfielders have fallen back into where your center backs are supposed to be, and the center backs are still transitioning, then there's a gap in the middle of the field. I also think that there are other reasons for that gap being there.
Why not?
Because, and this was something I mentioned Scott and Stephanie were here. Scott noticed, so I'll give him the credit for that. It's that Chicharito starts this by getting the ball from Ochoa, then playing it wide to Vela. But he makes a very strong sprint through the box, and Kellen Acosta spots him, stays with him. I think the other defenders are very much focused on him because that's obviously something they've drilled on, is don't let him get open. And I think they're expecting Vela to make that run across and then do that diagonal, like, through ball that Chicharito can run onto. So I think everyone is so focused on him that they drop another couple of yards or they track him, and that pulls people out of position, and that creates that big space in the middle that Vela gets into. No one's there. He pulls the trigger, and it's a goal.
Hi. So yeah, 1-1 after, 24, 25 minutes?
And with this...
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, this is the Quick Take Hot Take show. So, again, this is one that maybe upon further viewing, I will be wrong. But we had a tweet about how much do we blame Guzan for that goal. And it's a really well-hit goal. Obviously, he screened a little bit. But one thing we've talked about many times with goalkeepers is that if your feet aren't set when the shot is taken, then you've got to get set and then dive. Yeah. And if you watch that, he is very much still in motion when the shot is taken. Now, that might be because he doesn't expect one to be coming, or maybe he can't see it. But either way, I will say he is a little bit slow to get down. Now, maybe if I watch it like 5 more times, I won't be quite so critical. But watching it again on the highlights, I thought, maybe he could have gotten a little bit lower, a little bit faster. But maybe that's nitpicking.
Yeah,
as
it
well.
looks to me like his legs are sort of scrambling away under him. He never really gets a full dive on. Doesn't he end up sort of only like spread halfway across the goal?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean,
like he doesn't get a full reach all the way to the post.
Yeah. So I mean, it's maybe he could do better there. Maybe the center back should have stepped, and I think that's probably the key one there for me, is that there needed to be somebody holding that space, and I think that's why we talk about counterattack can be so deadly, because everybody is that is when everyone is kind of scrambling and trying to make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. And if you're only focused on that kind of like immediate role, you forget all the other things that are out there.
Yeah, and that's what I meant earlier. If you watch, I can't remember if it's Gonzalez and Cameron or just one of them, but they're back in position, but they're still running backwards because they're still trying to like get set behind the midfielders. Mm-hmm. It's almost like they're still trying to get back into the spot where they should be. The play's already unfolding. He's already come inside, and it was time to step forward, not keep running backwards to get set.
And if you have,
they're sort of getting ready for a thing that's already happened.
Yeah. I think that makes sense. But I think if people are like new to soccer or maybe haven't played, like the best way I can kind of explain it is that like an organized defense where everybody has practiced and drilled together and trained together and know what's happening. It's like packing for a trip where you are like, you can kind of focus on everything. Like, oh, I need that and I haven't packed that yet. And you're kind of like making that plan and crossing things off. But when you're in like transition and you're defending a counterattack, it very much becomes like, I need to not forget my underwear. I need to not forget my underwear. I need to not forget my underwear. And then you get to your destination, you open up your suitcase, and it's just underwear. Because you're only focused on packing that one thing that you forget all the other things that are happening. And that's kind of what makes defending counters so difficult, is because if you get focused on the underwear, you forget to pack all the other stuff. And in this case, the underwear was, I guess, Javier Hernandez?
No.
Yeah.
I forgot all my insulin.
That would be very bad for you. And then to
use a universal example.
Yeah, I was gonna say, for me that would just be weird. like if I just remembered to pack insulin, like how I was packed very inappropriately for this trip. But yeah, so 1-1 heading into halftime, coming out of halftime, and then at the full 90 minutes, it remained 1-1. But lots of other stuff going on in there. We had the crossbar hit by Hector Herrera. We had the post hit, as I said, by Michael Bradley. But I think really it was the second half. It just seemed to be a little bit more of a chess match and a little bit more neither side wanting to like both sides wanting to win, but neither side wanting to lose. And I think the desire to not lose was stronger in the last 20 to 25 minutes for both teams.
Well, I felt like Mexico were going for it a lot more, and the US I think they had a simple plan, right? It wasn't like, I imagine like the chalkboard for this game was not like, didn't have crazy arrows all over it. You know? And it was kind of simple in that the back five basically stayed as a back five the whole time. And then the four midfielders were just four in a line, right? When we were defending. So you just have five and then four, which gives you like two cover on the flank either side, right? You had the partnership of Yedlin and Areola on one side, and then DaMarcus Beasley and Christian Pulisic on the other side, and they formed a block. And then Acosta and Bradley formed like a central block in the middle. Then the three centre-backs underneath them, with like Cameron especially stepping out if needed, and Omar Gonzalez like heading and sliding things away. And then you just they just made sure to move more or less as units. Like the thing I saw a lot was just seeing Acosta and Bradley sort of doing that synchronized dance left and right together, just hopping left, hopping right, everybody in shape. And then Acosta would like occasionally push out, and I noticed that every time Acosta would push out, Bradley would then go with him and Areola would go with him. Like everything was very sort of synchronized and organized. And then they would make the good decision to not push too far. Like if they realized they'd been dragged up the field, you'd see Acosta sort of hop backwards. And then lots of just good little, I want to call them poke tackles. You know what I mean? There's a lot of like weird poke tackles that were made, but they were mostly successful. And the ball would be poked away, and then we would break, and then Pulisic would run at someone, and sometimes he would get tackled, and sometimes he would get away. But the threat from Pulisic and from Bobby Wood, and maybe less so from Areola, but the threat was always there that the US could break. And you could tell Mexico were just a little nervous that even though we were all back behind the ball, with the exception of Bobby Wood, the threat was always there. And I think that's maybe the key to making that 5-4-1 kind of ultra defensive thing work, is to just make clear that if you push too many men forward, Mexico, we will come at you with our fast guys.
Yeah, I think yes, you are definitely correct there, and that's a much better synopsis of the second half than I was offering. But I still think like that a part that plays into that though is that yes, Mexico tried some things and made their substitutions, but it did feel like it was still those guys are good and can score, so we're not going to go crazy with this. Like it wasn't as though the US had just had 10 men in the box, one guy standing at midfield will boot it long, and that's it. They did sort of have so much more to it that, I think you're right, Mexico couldn't just throw everything forward for fear of getting counterattacked upon. And so that's where it was kind of, it felt like a lot of the same overall attack from Mexico, even if they were in the driver's seat. It just didn't seem like there was a lot of like innovation or a desire to like figure things out much more because there was that concern about the counter.
And I think the US blocked off all avenues, right? I know Vela managed to dribble inside and shoot that one time, but every other time that a player, whether it's Aquino or Chucky Lozano or Vela again, every time they cut inside ready to shoot, this time the US is ready because it wasn't the counter-attack from our own corner kick. There was someone there to block that path, right? And then when they would cross it, it would just meet Omar Gonzalez's head, and it wouldn't always be perfectly cleared, but it would be at least not going towards goal.
I mean, you say Omar, and he had a couple of those, but I say hooray for Jeff Cameron. I still say that because like Omar had a few where he had the header, like he headed it out for a corner when it easily could have been a much more difficult player. He could have done something stupid, tried to head it back into play, and instead like concedes a wide open goal. So I thought Omar did fine, but Jeff Cameron had at least 4 very well-timed interceptions, or just getting ahead to it to flick it out for a corner, or just getting a foot to it to block a shot or block a cross. I thought he was the man of the match for me, even with Michael Bradley scoring that goal. It still goes to Jeff Cameron because he really did. He was that kind of lockdown player that you need, that your defense needs to be like, all right, we're not letting anything else up. Like we're going to lock this down and hold it down. And I think they did that. And I think Jeff Cameron was a major part of that.
Yeah, here's how I see it. Omar Gonzalez was the one who was sort of all arms and legs and heads like a big daddy long leg or spider, you know what I mean? Just like meeting it somehow and poking it away, and it could go anywhere. Like once he connects with it, it could go anywhere, but as long as it went away, it was kind of okay. Whereas Jeff Cameron was more like a Rolls Royce. He would just be really smooth, come in, dispossess someone, and then he would like move the ball up the field, or he would get away from a Mexican attacker and he would play a nice ball into a midfielder, and it would all be nice and calm. And I feel like if you've got, like, with all respect to Omar Gonzalez, so he's a player I really like, especially when he has a night like tonight, when he was kind of weirdly a hero in terms of just meeting everything and making sure nothing got through. If you've got 3 of those guys as your 3 centre-backs, it can get really panicky, right?
Yep.
You just keep poking things away and they keep coming back at you. But if you've got another guy, especially if your central guy is someone who really does, like, take possession of the ball, calm everything down, pick out a pass, even do a little Cruyff turn on a striker as he's coming to get you, that kind of stuff, or give him a little hip shake to throw him off, you just suddenly the rest of the team gets a lot more confident and a lot less panicky. So that's why all those moments from Jeff Cameron filled me with confidence, because I think they filled the rest of the US team with confidence. I'd even say he reminded me a little bit of when Rafa Marquez plays in the middle of a back 3. That's what Jeff Cameron looked like to me.
Jeff Cameron looked like Rafa Marquez.
Yeah, just in terms of being the central person in the back three who calmed everybody down and made all that the big defensive plays.
I know.
I remember. Maybe could you do me a favor when you talk to Matt Doyle? Could you ask him about that Cameron Marquez comparison? And if he says like no, he doesn't agree with that, that's fine. Because I'm going back to a conversation I had with him maybe a year or two ago about like why people asking why don't the US play a back three, and Matt Doyle's answer was because the US doesn't have that sort of controlling central centre back who's good enough with their feet that they can sort of step out of the back three and dictate the play. And like we thought maybe Michael Bradley, if he stepped into the back three, might be the guy to do it. But that performance from Jeff Cameron tonight says to me that he could be that guy.
Yeah, no, I'm with you completely. That question with a little bit of incredulity in there was because I feel like anytime you compare a key U.S. defender to a key Mexico defender, and that defender is Rafa Marquez, it's going to raise an eyebrow. So, I expect to hear from some people just saying, like, how dare you? Rafa Marquez is the devil. Because he does seem to have that. I only say that because when we drafted our CONCACAF team and I drafted Rafa Marquez, we got like 10 tweets that were just like, you have Marquez in your team, so you lose. So it does seem like it genders, it brings about that sort of feeling.
Yeah, but I think the reason there's so much dislike of Rafa Marquez is because he does things like score in the last minute against the US in Columbus at the grand old age of like 37, 38. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. So fair point there. And
it's not because he's a bad player, put it that way.
Yeah, no. But since you've mentioned older players, veteran players, let's mention a young player, a guy who we haven't talked about very much tonight, and I think there's a reason, Christian Pulisic. I would say one of his quieter nights, maybe outside of like the Cuba game, the Cuba friendly, this was maybe his quietest game I've seen him play for the U.S., but I think that there were very deliberate reasons for that.
Yeah, I mean, I actually really liked what I saw because he was committed to always being in that sort of left midfield defensive spot and helping out DaMarcus Beasley when he needed to. And he was also, even though it didn't always come off, he was always confident enough to drive and dribble forward, right? And really just like test Mexican defenders and have them on their heels when he needed to. And I think Odie made this point earlier, but I'll repeat it again now. I think that was key to just making sure that the US wasn't just sort of passive and sitting back and absorbing everything from Mexico and just hoping for the best. There was still always that threat from Pulisic, and you could tell they were a little bit scared of him.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it comes about, though, from the kind of headlines coming in. He said we're getting 3 points. He is the biggest talent on the U.S. right now. So I think he was the one that they had kind of looked at as if they are going to play on the counter, if they are going to try to break, he's the guy who's going to do it. And so I think you did see a lot of physicality early because I think Mexico wanted to kind of stamp the authority down of the game. Salcedo in particular wanted to elbow some things
went to
down.
Elbow the authority into the game.
Yeah, right? And yes, and I agree that he should probably not have been on the field after both of those elbows. Yeah. Maybe the first one was a little bit of a yellow card, but I'd say that was at least 2 yellows there, so who knows. But yeah, I do think that Mexico were trying to be a little bit physical, and especially physical with Christian Pulisic. And I think the United States did a really good job of not responding and not really taking the bait there.
Yeah.
It's almost...
did you see like when Pulisic had that late chance where he sort of juggled it a couple of times and then sort of shot from more or less the top of the box? He was trying to curl it inside that near post again, but couldn't quite make it. He immediately ran back to the left mid position and got back in his defensive shape. Yeah. And then when he was subbed out, he was like telling everybody, "Come on, let's do it!" Like it was just again, he's 18, so it's this perfect teenage performance, right? It can't always be scoring the winning goal every time, right? But that's just a ridiculous bar to set for him. I think the other thing is that when he has what you could maybe call this an off night because he didn't get shots on target, he didn't really create golden opportunities. He wasn't like a super creator. But even when he's having like one of those off nights, he's still sort of super effective and puts the fear into opposition defenders. So I like seeing the floor of Christian Pulisic after we saw the ceiling, and it turns out the floor is still really good.
Yeah, because I mean, I do think that a big part of this game plan was get the ball to Christian and let him try some stuff. And, it's the quote about Clint Dempsey. I think it applies to Christian Pulisic. At least it will for the U.S. national team. I think he is going to be the creative engine for that team. And with that comes that, he's going to get dispossessed sometimes. And he's going to have a sloppy touch here. And maybe he should have passed instead of shot. Or vice versa. I think those moments are going to happen. And so to judge this game based on he got tackled a whole bunch, I think that was always going to happen because I think he was very much a central figure in the U.S.'s attacking plan. Or the central figure.
And it also seems that he can... It also seems that he can sort of perform a lot of roles for the United States, right? Because he can be the central attacking midfielder with kind of a free role as he was against Trinidad.
Yep.
Or he can be the left midfielder who works up and down the field, but there is also an attacking threat sort of when he gets the ball, when we hit on the counter-attack. So it seems like whatever the game plan is, he's going to have a role in it because he's got he's like a Swiss Army knife sort of, you know, he's got multiple uses.
I want to say that with that in mind, I think every American soccer fan owes it to Thomas Tuchel to, if they ever see him, give him a nice little hug. Because if you think about it, Christian Pulisic started this season playing out on the wing and doing that sort of hustle up, hustle back, do your job, be defensive. You're not going to be that involved in the attack. Then as it progressed, we saw him as one of kind of part of that front three in that 3-4-2-1. Or just being much more involved in the goal scoring. And it seems like these two World Cup qualifiers were the two different positions he plays. One is kind of freedom of movement up top and just trying to create chances, and one is doing that, staying wide, doing the running, still getting forward, but, mostly, doing your job.
I think maybe when the files are declassified in 50 years, we'll find out he was secret soccer agent Tuchel.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. But Daryl, I wanted to ask you, and this is kind of a trick question because I know the answer. This did seem like a formation that they had practiced. This seemed like a formation that most of the players were familiar with and comfortable in. So I want to ask you, when do you think Bruce Arena told the team that they were going to be playing this formation?
I would say as soon as camp met up.
Correct.
That first Monday when they all met up, I think he was like, hey, here's what we're going to do against Trinidad. Here's what we're going to do against Mexico.
Quote from U.S. Soccer, "We told the team on day one of this camp that we would play that way in this game." End quote. So, yeah, they've been working on it seems. And maybe that's why we still have closed-door training sessions, where the media get to watch the first 10 minutes of them jogging around, and then they go away so they can practice the stuff they're actually going to do.
Yeah, that makes sense, right? Behind closed doors. Well, not closed doors, but, not in front of the cameras.
Mm-hmm. So we've talked for a decent amount of time, given that this is a quick take, hot take. Anything else you wanted to talk about? The only other thing that I still haven't made up my mind on is, if we're going to play this way again, do we go Josie or do we go Bobby Wood?
Bobby Wood for the pace.
You think?
Yeah, simple as that. I think it's always, you've got to have the threat of pace up front. You even saw when Josie came in, it was a lot of flick on to nobody except to Ochoa instead. I definitely think it's got to be a fast guy as the centre forward, a fast guy who's going to hustle opposition defenders. And Josie does neither of those things. He does a lot of other things well. He doesn't do those things. It's got to be, I reckon, Bobby Wood or Jordan Morris is the centre forward if we ever do this again. But I mean, here's a question for you. When do we do this again? Next trip to the Azteca? If we play Brazil or Germany in a World Cup quarterfinal? I think this is like a tool that I think won't get taken out of the box too often.
Yeah, I don't think it will either. I think it's something that, if you really got to change it up, and maybe it will be also based on available personnel, that if you have a couple people go down, this suits us better than sticking with a 4-2-3-1 or a 4-4-2 or whatever Bruce Arena chooses to do. I'll say this, I don't know when they're going to use it again, but I really much enjoy, and this is a thing that Matt Doyle talked about, I think, when the U.S. first did this against Venezuela in the friendly. I think he said, it's a club I don't mind having in the bag, and I would agree with that. I don't mind having a thing that the United States have practiced and can pull out if they need to.
Yeah, I think all the stuff that we heard about Bruce Arena when he took back over is coming true, which is that soccer's not really that complicated, right? You can put out this 5-4-1 formation, give everybody some pretty basic instructions, get them to practice it a bit so everybody knows what they're doing, and there you go. Away we go. And then we get a point at the Azteca.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think I agree with that to some extent, if that's your approach. You can certainly do the Mourinho thing of 18-page dossiers, and we know lots of managers do that now and are uber prepared, and that's the other way of going. But if your disposition and demeanor is sort of meh, then that style of management suits you, because then it is we're gonna do this, we're gonna do it simple. It's like eating at a restaurant where everything is 7 to 8 ingredients, if that, but it's all cooked perfectly and seasoned perfectly, so it's all really, really well done, versus eating at a restaurant where there are 40 ingredients in one little side dish. It's both of those can be very, very good meals, but they're very, very different. And if you try to switch those restaurants doing what they do, it's going to be awful, because you can't have the simple basic one suddenly having 40 ingredients, and you can't have the 40 ingredient one suddenly being simple and basic. So it's kind of got to suit the style, and I think that approach suits U.S. under Bruce Arena.
Well, I think if the chef gets to work with his kitchen every week, as you do in club football, then you can go with the many, many, many ingredients. But if the chef only meets up with his kitchen staff once every 2 months, then you got to go with the basic ingredients.
Ratatouille. That's what I have to say to this conversation.
Just get a rat in your hat.
Yeah. Voiced by Patton Oswalt, and then you're good to go. That's the key point there, yeah.
That's why so many U.S. goalkeepers are bald.
Sure, I guess. So they can wear a hat? Or because of a rat? I'm confused.
No, because they've all had rats in their hats at some point pulling on their hair. That's why it always comes out.
Well, at this point, it's fair to say that we have talked about all we need to talk about, and the train is slowly coming off the rails. So I think I'm going to end it here and say, Daryl, thank you very much again for taking time. I don't even know what time it is where you are, but I'm assuming late, and I'm assuming the sun is not up.
The sun has just come up.
There you go. All right, cool. Well, then you're welcome that we kept you awake for the sunrise.
So does this still qualify as a quick take? Because quick takes used to be like 10 minutes, right? I feel like this has gone longer.
Well, it's knowing that I'm not then going to call you back for like an hour and a half recap, I think makes it the quick take and the long one blend together. And especially when it's a game where the U.S. starts in a back three and draws 1-1 at the Azteca and there's lots of drama, I think it's worth extending it a little bit.
I agree. Well, thanks for calling me. Appreciate it.
All right, buddy. Well, thanks for answering, and we look forward to having you back in studio in about another week, right?
Yep, I will see you next week.
Sounds good, my friend.